I like to start out with this drawing from Da Vinci, mostly because Da Vinci is, like one of my upper-level heroes, and he was quite interested in flight. This is one version of the flying machine that he drew, but he also had ideas for fixed wings or flapping wing type aircraft. Luckily, he, as far as I know, never actually tried to fly any of his inventions, but he was thinking along the right lines, and you can clearly see how things have evolved in the years since. And I guess one thing that my experience has taught me is that in aviation there are not that many brand new ideas, but it's possible to do very useful things by taking ideas that are out there and putting them together in appropriate ways. So you don't need to read any of this, but the most important thing is that I've been flying out of Los Alamos now for about 30 years. I think maybe 29, something like that. And interesting place to learn to fly. But for a lot of years, I was just flying Cessnas, or eventually ended up with the Bonanza. Gary Sullivan and I fly a Cessna 140 that's in one of the old hangars down here. And I really never saw any particular need to go beyond that. It seemed like it could get me places, or I could have fun, and that was the important thing to try to do. But in about 2012, Marilyn Phillips and I bought a place in Abiquiu on the Chama River. When we saw this place, we said, this is where we want to be. At the time, I was looking for a place that might have enough property that I could build a strip. Well, unfortunately, there were such places, but they weren't this place, and we ultimately decided that this was the place that we wanted to be. Now, looking at it from above, there's a whole series of little homesteads, little farms. It probably started out about 10 times wider, but over years have been turned into small plots that basically run from the road down to the river. Our place is over here on the right, and this field in kind of the upper left of it is about a 3-acre field. The longest distance is about 500 feet, so not really prime location for flying airplanes in and out. Not to say it couldn't be done, but it seemed like it was a challenge and maybe not the best idea. So about that time, I headed off in a couple of different directions. One, some local person was advertising a little Kit Fox-like airplane, short takeoff landing, and I'm pretty confident that this little guy will be able to land there. I think it'll probably land in about 200 feet, take off and land. So I think I will be able to fly in and out. Now, those of you who've done it, though, realize that, even if you're only required 200 feet to land, 500 feet is not a lot of margin for error. And so I eventually decided that this is probably not a workable solution for everyday transport back and forth. And that's what I was thinking about at the time. I was still working at the lab, and so the idea of being able to turn an hour commute into a 15-20 minute commute seemed like a very good thing. I should also say, though, that one lesson learned with this is if you buy somebody else's project that's never had an airworthiness certificate, you can count on challenges in getting it registered. And I've probably spent 2 years back and forth with the FAA. Finally, they agreed. I was able to get it registered, I guess. Still got to get an airworthiness certificate. It was originally built as an ultralight. It was not transitioned into an LSA when in a very narrow window when you could do that. And so, but basically I just need to go to a DAR and that will be able to fly. On the other hand, this aircraft over on the right, in principle, should be able to land there, you know, right now or any other day. This was this is an Instrom 280 helicopter. This is something that I own with Paul Osowski here, and I think we both went into it with a, you know, kind of, you know, clouds in our eyes or something. But what I ultimately realized, two things that ultimately convinced me that a helicopter was not something that I wanted to do, at least not this one on a daily basis. One of them was that helicopters are very expensive. I mean, they're expensive to insure, expensive to maintain, expensive to operate, to train in. I mean, if you get a helicopter license, 40 hours in a helicopter may well cost you $80,000. I mean, that's the kind of numbers that they toss around at a place in Albuquerque. So it's a challenge. The other thing that was surprising to me about a helicopter is that if you're flying along and your engine stops, you have to make very decisive actions very quickly. In an R-22, before you go out in it the first time, they will tell you that if the engine stops, you have to lower the collective in 1 second or you're dead. Now, that's probably an overstatement, but basically that's true, because if you don't lower the collective, it will not go into auto rotation, and the rotor system will fold up, and you have no recovery. So the more I thought about that, the more I thought, maybe not, you know, maybe that's not great. I tend to, you know, confronted with a problem, I tend to think about it a little bit, and that's really not the way you need to fly a helicopter. You need to be prepared to do something.
Yeah, John, just last week the NTSB put out their report on that crash of the firefighting helicopter that was up there, and one of the issues in the NTSB report was probably a flawed attempt at an auto rotation was one of the contributing factors to the accident. So, I mean, it hits even the professionals.
Yeah, it does. Thinking about how to, you know, get the benefits of a helicopter without that particular problem, I started thinking about gyroplanes, because gyroplanes in a lot of ways are like helicopters. They can descend and actually ascend very quickly under some circumstances. But the biggest thing is that when you're flying along in a gyroplane, if your engine stops, you know, it's no more of a problem than it is in a fixed-wing airplane. You don't have to take any decisive, immediate steps. You just need to look for a place to land. And so, so that was encouraging and to me. And another thing, at the time they would say, well, you know, a gyroplane will do 90% of what a helicopter will do for 10% of the price. If you have a really old gyroplane, you know, a Benson 1950s gyroplane, that's probably true. Modern gyroplanes have gotten a lot more expensive, but they're still a lot cheaper to own and operate than a helicopter. So what are the distinctions? And I thought a lot about this, because there are a lot of features that you see in a helicopter or a gyroplane, but what really defines it? So in both helicopters and gyroplanes, you have a rotor that is essentially a rotating wing. and it provides lift. And in fact, the reason that people got started with rotorcraft, a Spaniard named Juan de Sierra, in the 1920s, he saw a lot of planes, you know, in World War I that fell from the sky because they stalled. He thought, I want to make something that's stall resistant. And so he came up with this idea that if I have a rotating wing, then the wing is going a lot faster than I'm moving through the air, and so it should be stall resistant. And in fact, that proved to be the case. So you don't really stall and spin a helicopter, aside from this thing that happens if you keep the collective up too long after you lose power in a helicopter. And often people tend to think about this rotating wing as a lifting disc, right? It's even though it's not solid disc, but it effectively functions as a disc. And so if you're trying to, for instance, calculate lift, you do it on that basis. The main difference between a helicopter and a gyrocopter, operationally, is that in the helicopter, air is going down through the rotor system. You have a motor that's turning your rotating wing, and air flows down through it, and that gives you lift. It also gives you thrust. Most helicopters, the main rotor system is also the propulsion system. In a gyrocopter, on the other hand, or an autogyro or a gyroplane, and these really are all just different names for the same thing. Gyrocopter is actually a trademark of Benson, and the FAA calls them gyroplanes, and most of Europe calls them autogyros or something like that. But in all of these aircraft, the net wind is moving up through the system. So as you're moving forward, the blade is like this. That means the wind is coming through it, and the wind coming through it is what spins it. Now, the spinning then produces lift, and so it's not really exactly thrust, but the lift that you create from this rotating wing is what actually allows you to fly. Another thing that, so what this means is that you get propulsion from some other mechanism. And gyroplanes, the early ones basically were just modified airplanes that they took the wings off and put a rotor on. So they had most of them had an engine and propeller out front. Most modern gyroplanes put the engine and the propeller in back. It doesn't really make any difference as long as you've got something that's driving you forward and you have the rotor set, then air will flow through it, it will spin, and you'll have lift. These are some early examples of both gyroplanes and early helicopters. The one in the upper left is a Pitcairn gyroplane, but not significantly different from the ones that were created by the Spaniard in the early 20s. One thing I should say is that the key to making gyroplanes work, when they started trying to fly these things, they would go down the runway and it would roll over. What turned out to be the cause is that as the rotor is spinning, right, and you're moving forward, now one of your rotors is moving through the air faster than the other blade, and so it's got more lift, and so it tends to roll you over, right? That's a problem. So Sierra figured out that if he put the blades on a teetering system, right, so that it can rock back and forth in the course of its motion around the disc, that it would actually automatically compensate for this. You don't have to do anything, it just takes care of it. And in fact, gyrocopters or gyroplanes take care of a lot of that kind of stuff for you, right? In a helicopter, your rotor speed is set by the engine. In a gyroplane, your rotor speed is set by how fast you're going, how much weight you have, basically whatever it needs to be happy and fly, that's what it does. And so if you, for instance, put more weight in it, it spins faster. It just takes care of it. Now, a couple of other things. This was a Sikorsky helicopter, and it's notable that the only reason that Sikorsky was able to build this helicopter is that the U.S. government told him that he could use a patent that was belonged to one of the gyroplane guys for cyclic control, right? Which we'll talk about a little bit later. But you know, so there's a whole lot of common DNA in all rotorcraft, and the differences tend to be in how things are implemented. This is actually, I thought, a very interesting picture of a 1930s coaxial rotor helicopter. So all these ideas have been out there for a long time. It's, you know, as I say, it's not new, but there are interesting and useful ways to do it. These are some more modern gyroplanes. These first couple are kind of 50s vintage Benson gyroplanes. This is something called a Dominator. This is kind of where gyroplanes are going, toward composite, sleek, really sort of sexy aircraft designs. And the one that I ultimately decided to build was based on this. This is by a company called Aviomania. They're in Cyprus. It's not the greatest, you know, it has its own share of problems associated with it. But I liked a lot of things about it. A lot of the challenges and problems associated with early gyroplanes have been resolved. A lot of things happened because they went from something that started out being pulled by a car, you know, down a runway and would rise up and then settle down when you got to the end of the runway. When they started putting bigger and bigger engines on them, then a lot of things turned out to be problems that had not been properly considered. So for example, one of the things that makes this more stable is that the center line of the thrust is right at the center of mass. In a lot of early gyroplanes, the motors were higher. And what that meant, especially as you went to bigger engines, is that if you were ever in a situation where you started to turn down and you gave it throttle, then the engine would just push you over, and then you're probably not going to live to tell about it. So centerline thrust solves problems. A lot of the early gyroplanes didn't have a horizontal stabilizer, and so that meant that they tended to be pretty twitchy in pitch, and that's a problem because most rotorcraft are subject to be over-controlled, right? And so if you're going up too fast and you push it down, and you know you can go into a pilot-induced oscillation pretty simply. And having a horizontal stabilizer helps solve that problem. A couple of things about rotor heads. So most helicopters, almost all helicopters, use essentially a rotor that swings in a plane, right? That is fixed orientation relative to the helicopter, and the control is kind of subtle. You know, you think about you know, push rods and all that sort of thing that are actually tilting the rotor head. You think about it in those terms, but what actually happens is that as the rotor swings around, the pitch is constantly changing as you go in a circle. So that's called cyclic control. And what it means is that if you pitch up over here, then the helicopter is going to turn that way or vice versa. So gyroplanes do it in a different way. I should say that some helicopters do have a rocking, a teetering head. Some of them have rotors that do like this. Those are some of the ones that have problems if you don't lower the collective quick enough. But in any case, that's how a helicopter head works. This is a gyroplane rotor head, and I thought I would bring an example so you can see it. So in a gyroplane rotor head, the rotor is teetering on this bolt, so it has that action that stabilizes it, and it's basically just freely turning. Right? And in a helicopter, you usually have a shaft that comes into the rotor head and drives it. In this one, you don't. And in this, you'll notice that the whole rotor head can tilt from side to side from these controls. Okay? And it can also tilt forward and back. And so this is the way that most gyroplanes operate.
Is that out of your gyroplane?
This is yes. This is my gyroplane. So another thing to note is that in the very early days, like the Benson gyroplanes, a guy would stand up and push the rotor around just to get it started a little bit, so that it didn't take a mile to get the rotor up to speed. In modern gyroplanes, almost all of them have some sort of pre-rotator, and so you'll spin the blades until you get up to maybe 100. Maybe 200 RPM. Then you take off down the runway, and the wind speeds it on up until it's fast enough that you can actually lift off. Sorry about that.
Question.
So, yes.
Are the rotors extruded aluminum or carbon fiber or?
All the above. Most the rotors that are actually on this little helicopter have an aluminum extrusion essentially as a leading edge, and then have just aluminum wrapped around it that has a seam on the back edge. So it's basically hollow. But there are carbon fiber, there are fiberglass, basically anything. The early ones were wood. That works too. Now, there are some advantages to having it somewhat flexible. But that's not essential. I mean, you can easily make a rotorcraft that has essentially a rigid rotor system, and you have to deal with some of the other issues, other physics issues, but that's the case. Now this is
John,
yes.
you might mention the rebar.
Oh, okay. So I have reason to know that at least some rotor systems, the original rotor, which is on this gyroplane right here, was a composite, epoxy. And what actually happened is they put a piece of rebar along the leading edge of this, embedded in the stuff. Of course, it's a beautiful blade, very smooth, shiny, but rather than building something, they needed something heavy and they needed something strong, so they just put a piece of rebar in it. This was built in Slovenia, I think, so maybe that has something to do with it as well.
And they give it some additional inertia too, so that you got a
Well,
little.
so the biggest problem that you have when you lose power is that the blade needs to keep spinning, right? If the blade stops spinning, that's when you're hosed. Now, if you think about it, this rotor is essentially a big rotating parachute, right? It's as long as it's rotating, it will slow your descent it's a very safe system in that regard. But if you have too much pitch and the rotor stalls because of it, that's a problem. So one thing that you can do to help it is to have more momentum. And so you can put weights out on the ends, you can put them embedded in the rotor blades. There are a lot of ways that will help solve that problem. We've had some issues trying to show video. We had issues trying to show anything, but then we had issues trying to show video, so I'm not going to go there. But I will assert that this gyroplane has flown. It's had a series of test flights. Started out in Texas, and that's partly because I couldn't find anybody who would train me anywhere close by, and very few people who knew enough about them to be able to ask them questions. And so ultimately I went to this place. This is Fainting Goat Airport in Blum, Texas. And, but in any case, flew it there, flew it beautifully. Had some problems when I brought it back to New Mexico that I'll discuss offline if anyone wants. But in any case, it did fly. I won't. This one's going to start, I think.
It's working.
It's
It's working.
Yeah. Well, you can only tell. Here it goes. So normally takeoffs and landings in a gyroplane are pretty airplane-like, but that's not essential. You can basically, as I say, take off vertically and land vertically if you have the right techniques. In the midst of all this, thinking about what I would like to build myself, I ran across this. This was something that was sponsored by Boeing. They wanted to build a personal vertical takeoff aircraft, and they made it pretty difficult. You had to take off vertically, be able to fly for 20 minutes or so, land vertically within like a 30-foot or 30-yard, I forget, 30-foot, I think.
It was 30 feet.
Yeah, that was 12 feet tall, so you had to clear a 12-foot obstacle, go out and fly for 20 minutes, come back, land, go out and fly again, and so forth. The real challenge for this competition was that they wanted it to be very small. They basically want something that you could put in your garage. So the whole thing was in an 8-foot diameter sphere. That's a real challenge for rotorcraft because most of them have rotors that are somewhere between 16 and 30 feet long, and so that sort of automatically disqualified them. This is a little company that I set up to do it, and this was what I proposed. This is basically a composite of a lot of things that I thought were good ideas at the time. In order to have enough lift to be able to get off the ground in a very small aircraft, you need a lot of blades. Unfortunately, the most useful part of the blades is out at the ends, right? So it's not linear that you double the number of blades and you get twice the lift, in half the space. But in any case, this was what I designed. Well, I didn't win. They didn't even give me $50,000 if they were going to start. But there was a chance to get $1 million out of it, so it seemed worth the effort. This is just to give you an idea. This is an ultralight helicopter. I call it a Mosquito. It's a single-person helicopter, but the size that they required is this box here. Now you can see that most of the aircraft is outside the box, and so you do have to do some things to make it work. Now, as I said before, most gyroplanes take off from the runway, and so how do you make it take off vertically? So actually this is, you know, another idea that people had a long time ago and demonstrated it, but never really caught on. It is possible to make a gyroplane that will jump off the ground. There's a video of both of this. I will tell you that in this video, they lift off the ground, climb for about 5 seconds, then start coming back down, and that's the problem. In a gyroplane, in order to lift off, in a standard gyroplane, in order to lift off, what you do is you spin the blade up to maybe 150% of a normal flying rotational speed. And then you change the pitch, and then you jump off the ground. The problem is you can't continue to power it once you've jumped off the ground, because if you do, the torque will cause the whole aircraft to spin, which is not fun. It probably may or may not be fatal, right? But it's not any fun. And but if you just lift off the ground, if you overspeed it, remove the power to the rotor, and then lift off the ground, you'll climb for a certain amount of time until your blade starts slowing down, and then you can treat it as a regular gyroplane. If you still have no power, you can still come down and land, but you know you've not gone very far under those circumstances. I've talked to people about this. Some people, you know, pilots think it's a lot of fun, right? But if you think about it, this is kind of like being on a ballistic missile, right? Because you start off fast, and then you start slowing down as you get higher. I think that's why passengers don't seem to like them so much. It's a little abrupt. In any case, proof of principle, right? It can work. A gyroplane-like aircraft will work. They actually had them working in the 20s, but there's been kind of a renaissance of this idea, and there are a number of companies that are actively working toward this kind of aircraft. Some other things. The idea of having counter-rotating rotor system. This is actually part of a potential solution for overcoming the torque, right? If you have two rotors that are counter-rotating, then you don't need a tail rotor. You can if they're appropriately pitched relative to each other, they will cancel each other, and you'll be able to lift off. This was a patent I found from the 1990s. This was never built, but had some pretty good ideas. The idea that you had two sets of blades that were rotating in opposite direction. In this case, it also had kind of a disc that worked as an actual flying surface, like a lifting body. This was actually the thing that convinced me that it would work. This is an RC model that somebody built out of foam core, basically. Got a set of two sets of rotors that are both fixed pitch, and the fixed pitch, they're in opposite directions, the top and bottom rotor, and so they rotate. This is a few sets, images from a movie, but the guy takes off a table, goes, flies around, and comes back, and lands on a table, stops in about a foot and a half. So when I saw this, I thought, you know, this idea can work. You know, there are a lot of details, obviously, to make it work well, but it can work. It's another thing that kind of got me interested in coaxial helicopters. This was something called an air scooter that was developed by a guy named Norris out in California. These are some pictures of it in flight. This is kind of a typical coaxial rotor helicopter. And this, appeared on the covers of magazines, and people were thinking, I'm going to have one. It was actually built as an ultralight, because that meant that you didn't have to have a pilot's license to fly it. You shouldn't, take that as an invitation to go fly it without any training. But in any case, this is a model of it that he gave to me, the inventor. It turns out the problem with this was that he wanted to get around the idea of having pitch control on his rotors. He just wanted to have a motor that would spin it up fast enough that it would lift off. And in principle, that works, but it requires more motor than he was able to have reliably. They said they spent $1 million on trying to develop this engine that would work, and then ultimately they just gave the IP back to the company that was developing it and got out of the business. There have been other people who have tried to have coaxial helicopters with fixed pitch. It's just not a very practical thing. You need to be able to spin it up, get it to flying speed, then change the pitch, and then you're good. There are other rotorcraft. These things are kind of interesting, and they make a point that I think is important. When you have a coaxial rotor system, it's possible to use a tilting rotor to actually physically tilt the rotor head for control. So that means you don't have to have a cyclic. If you could get away with just having a collective pitch control, change the pitch on all of your rotors at the same time, and you can fly it. And I actually think that's kind of a sweet spot. That said, most aircraft, rotorcraft, or helicopters are different. Most of them have a single rotor. Most of them have an engine. So thinking about all of these various problems, I concluded this. This is a patent that I developed. The title sort of got locked in early, and I would probably have a more descriptive title. But the basic ideas are that in order to be able to lift off vertically and to do it in a controlled manner, you need to be able to have some sort of torque compensation, right? That's what the helicopter guys realized early on. You need some sort of torque compensation. And it can be coaxial counter-rotating rotors, or it can be a tail rotor, right? That's what a tail rotor does. It just compensates for the torque that otherwise will tend to spin the fuselage. The other thing that I realized is that if you're doing this as the vertical phase of flight in a gyroplane that mostly is going to be traveling in cruise, then you have the option of using electric motors, right? Because you only need 5 minutes of power for the vertical phases of flight, and you can do that with a single battery and a motor that you can get from a motorcycle, and it works. Well, we say it works. I'm confident it works, but that's the idea in any case. One other thing I'll comment about is that by the time I was submitting this patent, I was away from the lab, and my experience with patents had always been that you handed it off to a lawyer, and they submit it, and then it comes back with all the nasty stuff that the patent examiners say, and why it's obvious, any idiot would know that this would work, it's not worthy of a patent. But but it was my experience that I usually had to go back and fix it myself anyway. And so I said, well, let's just go through the whole process. So I wrote the patent, got it submitted as provisional, then I went through the process. It turns out that if you're doing something on your own, you can be treated as a micro entity. That means your costs are, in $100 or $200 versus, what can be thousands of dollars for a normal patent submission. And the patent examiners are allowed to help you. They tell you what's wrong and they tell you how you might be able to fix it. And so I went through that process, and it was actually, I learned more about what patents actually require than anything that I've ever done. So this is the basic idea. We have a gyroplane, pretty standard, except that we have an electric motor that drives it for liftoff. And we have some sort of torque compensation system. In this case, it's a coaxial rotor system, so they're spinning in opposite directions, and that takes care of torque. But there are other ways to do it, and one thought that I had is that if you want to stick with the simplicity of a single rotor, then you could pretty easily incorporate a little electric fan in the back, just a little battery-driven system that would act as a tail rotor. And that's a lot simpler than almost any helicopter that you're ever going to find, any existing helicopter, because they all use a shaft. They basically are spinning at some constant fraction of the speed of the rotor, and you're changing the pitch. There are a lot of moving parts, whereas with an electric fan, you just turn it up a little faster to get a little bit more compensation. You can incorporate electronic controls, so you can make the thing, to a very large extent, take care of itself. This was an idea for a coaxial rotor system. The reason that American helicopters don't use coaxial rotors, there are Russian helicopters there that do. The reason that Americans tend not to is that the whole control system, the whole rotor control system allowed you to get both cyclic control and collective control of pitch of all the rotors that are turning in different directions and sitting on top of each other. It turns out that ends up with a very complicated mechanism. Now, we have my little ultralight helicopter out in the EAA hangar for anybody who wants to take a look at it and talk about it. And it's got all that complexity, right? It's got bars and sliders and spherical bearings and all kinds of things that allow it to work. What I believe will be a useful solution is that if you want to have two blades that are turning that are synchronized, it's possible to take an automobile differential and basically turn that into a drive system. And it's pretty simple to give yourself collective pitch control so that you can change the pitch, but changing it as the blade is turning is a more complicated problem. It can still be done, but I think this may be a simple solution. And recall that if you've got counter-rotating rotors, you can actually just tilt the disc, and that will work. I'm sure there are challenges there, but fundamentally, we know it works. So, setting out to try to prove that this can actually work, we took a couple of approaches. So it turns out that the idea of using an electric tail rotor, and for that matter, an electric drive, is already out there. This is the way a lot of RC helicopters work now. This is just an electric tail rotor. The speed changes. I'll mention that the year after I submitted the provisional patent on this, Bell Helicopters patented an electric tail rotor. But the air electric tail rotor is much more complicated. Probably because, the patent examiner said, this is an obvious idea, so they added a bunch of bells and whistles to make it patentable. But in any case, this is a proof of principle. There's very little question in my mind that an aircraft can be made to operate like this. And in fact, this thing operates with capabilities that far exceed what you could ever do in a manned helicopter. For one thing, the pitch can go positive or negative, which means that it can fly upside down. Not that you really want to do that all that much, but it can be done, and it shows the feasibility. The other thing that I decided is if I was going to try to fly a coaxial rotor helicopter, which very few pilots have ever done, it might be useful to start with one that you're confident works, right? Don't want to start off in a test aircraft. This is something that appeared at Oshkosh a couple of years ago for the first time. It's an ultralight helicopter, coaxial rotor system. One of the advantages of this is that, you can fly it with no license at all. Again, this is not for the faint of heart, or maybe it is for the foolish, right? But you can fly it, and in my case, I've got basic operations in a helicopter down pretty well, but spending somewhere between $250 and $500 an hour, just to accumulate time, seems like maybe not the best use of money. And this, I believe, will allow me to log some time and to ultimately become a certificated helicopter pilot. I'll also note, though, that in gyroplanes, you don't have to do this. You don't have to get a full private license. You can be a sport pilot in a gyroplane. In fact, basically all gyroplanes at this point are LSA-type aircraft. Now there's not quite clear what's going to happen a year from now. Mosaic probably will have implications for flying helicopters. There may be a sport pilot helicopter, not quite clear yet. There's still a lot of churn in that. But in any case, this is the gyroplane that I have when it was sitting down in Espanola. By the way, this meeting was supposed to be in Espanola, but last week they destroyed the runway. So I figured if people couldn't fly in, and why have it there? It'll be nice, in September. Hopefully by the time Young Eagles is scheduled, they'll have a new runway and it'll be smooth and there won't be, wide crevices in the runway and so forth. In any case, we have done some test flights in Espanola of this. We started out with tethered test flights. We told ourselves that that's the way Benson did, not Benson, but Sikorsky. But the difference was that he had like a whole bunch of people around it, with ropes, and that had the advantage that it was a reasonably smart system. Although, standing close to a helicopter with a rope is the problem that we encountered was that when you tether it fairly tightly, and the real thing that you worry about is that something is, fundamentally wrong, and the thing, as you speed it up, it just flops over, right? So I wanted to tie it down pretty tight, and I could lift it off the ground a few inches, But sooner or later, I would hit some tether, and that would cause that to react and hit the ground, and so it was bucking for a little bit. The next step is to put these training wheels on it, outriggers, that should allow us to lift off the ground substantially without being tied to the ground, and give us a measure of protection. So that's where we're going. Where do I ultimately see this going? Well, I was kind of fascinated by this that appeared maybe 10, 15 years ago, and the Army bought a bunch of them. So this is basically a UTV that's flying on a parachute. This is not fundamentally different from what Andrew flies down in Espanola. So the idea of having something that could not only fly you to someplace, but would allow you to drive around when you get there, strikes me as ultimately what you'd like to do. Obviously, there have been other people who've had this kind of idea. This is a patent that I found, and I actually seen some versions of this. It basically makes a trike and a gyroplane, so you can accelerate down the runway under motor power, presumably, although I think it's not that fast. Take off. It's got folding rotors. Folding rotors turns out to be not that big a problem. These guys have figured out how to do that, and that's not a bad configuration for running down the road or out across country. This is actually a product. This is called a PAL-V. It's a gyroplane that's roadable. Doesn't have any capability for vertical takeoff. You still have to accelerate down the road or a runway or something and get your rotors spinning fast enough. I think they would like to have a vertical takeoff solution, and I'm hopeful that at some point they'll want to license mine. This is actually my preferred configuration for the land vehicle portion of a roadable gyroplane. Again, an old idea. This is a new Morgan, but these kinds of three-wheel vehicles have been being built in England since I think 1910 was when they started. It turns out that a three-wheel cycle with the steering on front is quite a good solution for a lot of things. I don't know if any of you watch Benny Hill, but the running gag there is that some of these English three-wheelers that have a single wheel in front, you turn a corner at 5 miles an hour and you can flop over. Right? They're not nearly as stable. This drives like a race car. And then, you can make off-road versions of it. I think ultimately something like this will be the way that you turn this vertical takeoff gyroplane into something that you can drive on the highway. So with that, thank you. If you have more questions, I'm happy to talk to you about it. And we're also planning to open up the hangar and you can take a look at it. So thank you very much.